They say blood is thicker than water, but nobody tells you what happens when that blood runs cold. When the people you raised, the ones you held through fever dreams and heartbreak, start treating you like expired milk, something they keep around out of obligation, but never really want to deal with. Before we begin, thank you for listening to this story. If this story speaks to you, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I read every single one. Now, let me tell you what happens when a grandmother refuses to disappear quietly. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 73 years old. Not 73 and fading, not 73 and finished. Just 73, and tired of being treated like I'm already dead. I raised 4 children in a 3-bedroom house in suburban Minnesota. Sarah, the perfectionist who color-coded her homework folders. Michael, the athlete who broke 3 windows with baseballs and my heart with his smile. Lisa, my sensitive middle child who cried at commercials and hugged me like her life depended on it. And Tommy, my baby, who never met a rule he couldn't bend, or a mess he couldn't make. 4 beautiful, demanding, exhausting miracles who consumed 30 years of my life. I changed diapers at 3 a.m. while Frank worked double shifts at the plant. I made Halloween costumes from scratch, because store-bought wasn't in the budget. I drove to soccer games in blizzards, sat through piano recitals where kids forgot their pieces, and worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and watching neighbors' kids during the day, to help pay for college tuitions. I was PTA president for 6 years running. I was the room mother who showed up with homemade cupcakes, not store-bought. I was the woman who chaperoned every field trip, attended every parent-teacher conference, and cheered at every single game, recital, and graduation. When other parents were too busy, I was there. When other families fell apart, we stayed strong. Frank and I, we built something. Not just a family, but a foundation. Sunday dinners were sacred. Holidays were productions. Birthdays were celebrated like national holidays. We had traditions, camping every August, Christmas cookies the weekend after Thanksgiving, Easter egg hunts that lasted hours, because I hid eggs everywhere, even places the kids didn't think to look. We weren't rich, but we were rich in the things that mattered. Love, laughter, presents. I knew every teacher's name, every friend's birthday, every fear and dream my children whispered in the dark. And now? Now I'm the inconvenience they schedule around. It wasn't always like this. The decline was so gradual, I almost didn't notice it happening. Like watching your hair turn gray, one day you look in the mirror and wonder when it all changed. When my husband Frank died 5 years ago from a sudden heart attack, they circled the wagons. Sarah flew in from Denver, leaving her marketing firm mid-presentation. Michael drove up from the city with his wife and 2 kids, sleeping on air mattresses in the living room. Lisa took unpaid leave from her teaching job, something she'd never done before. And even Tommy, my baby who never could sit still, stayed for a whole week, cooking breakfast every morning and sitting with me when the silence got too heavy. They made casseroles, tuna noodle, green bean, the ones I'd taught them to make. They organized the funeral, chose flowers, wrote the obituary, held my hand while I signed papers I didn't understand. They cleaned out Frank's closet when I couldn't bear to touch his shirts. They were my children again, not the busy adults they'd become. "We've got you, Mom," Sarah said, holding me while I sobbed into her shoulder. "You're not alone." For those first few months, I believed her. But grief, I learned, has an expiration date in other people's minds. 6 months after Frank's funeral, the daily calls became every other day. The weekend visits became every other weekend. A year later, the calls got shorter, more functional. "Just checking in, Mom. Everything okay? Good. Love you." 2 years later, I became the task they checked off their to-do lists. Called mom, visited mom. Duty done. The signs were subtle at first. Sarah would visit, but spend half the time on work calls. Sorry, mom, this client is driving me crazy. Michael would come by but watch football instead of talking, assuming I wanted the company even if we weren't actually connecting. Lisa would bring the grandkids, but leave after an hour because they get restless. Tommy would text instead of calling, sending memes and thinking that counted as conversation. I told myself they were just busy. They had demanding jobs, young families, mortgages, responsibilities. I remembered being that age, feeling pulled in every direction. I made excuses for them because I loved them, and because admitting the truth felt too dangerous. The truth was that I was becoming optional. The first Christmas after Frank died, they all came home. The house was full of noise and life and grandchildren sticky with cookie dough. Sarah's youngest, Emma, fell asleep in my lap while I read her The Night Before Christmas, the same book I'd read to her mother 25 years earlier. The same book I'd read to all of them, doing different voices for Santa and the reindeer, making them giggle until they begged me to read it again. This is nice, I thought, watching Emma's eyelashes flutter against her cheeks. We're going to be okay. This is just grief. We're going to find our new normal. I was wrong. By the second Christmas, cracks were showing. Michael's family came, but they left Christmas night instead of staying through the weekend like they used to. Early flight tomorrow, he explained, though I later saw photos on Facebook of them at his in-laws' house the next day. Sarah arrived late and left early, cutting our traditional Christmas Eve storytelling short, because the kids need to get to bed. My grandchildren, who used to beg for one more story, seemed just as eager to escape to their devices. Lisa came with store-bought cookies instead of the ones we used to make together, the sugar cookies shaped like stars and angels, decorated with too much frosting and sprinkles. When I asked if the kids wanted to bake some, she said, "Oh, Mom, they're not really into that stuff anymore. Not into baking cookies with Grandma." When had that happened? When had I become that stuff they weren't into? Tommy barely stayed an hour. He had plans with friends, he said. 35 years old and still prioritizing his buddies over family time. "I'll make it up to you, Mom," he promised, kissing my forehead like I was a child who needed consolation. But he never did make it up to me. None of them did. Last Christmas was when I finally understood what was happening. Michael and his family didn't come at all. Too far to drive, Mom, and flights are so expensive during the holidays. Never mind that I'd driven 6 hours to attend his daughter's birthday party 3 months earlier. 6 hours there and 6 hours back in one day, because that's what grandmothers do. Never mind that he'd just posted photos from their ski trip to Aspen, complete with captions about making memories and family time. Apparently, family time didn't include me anymore. Sarah came, but spent the entire visit on conference calls. Her phone rang during Christmas dinner, and she answered it. "Sorry, Mom, this client emergency just came up." She stood in my kitchen, discussing marketing strategies, while the turkey got cold and her children played video games instead of talking to their grandmother. She left on Christmas morning before we even opened presents. "Rain check," she said, kissing my cheek like this was just another casual visit instead of Christmas, the holiday I'd made magical for her for 18 years. Lisa showed up Christmas Eve with a casserole from the grocery store still in the plastic container. No attempt to hide it, no pretense that she'd made it herself like she used to. Just corporate convenience food on my dining room table where her grandmother's china used to hold homemade stuffing and green bean casserole made from the recipe passed down through 3 generations. "I've been so busy with work," she explained, not meeting my eyes. But I'd seen her Facebook posts about girls' night out, about weekend shopping trips, about all the things she'd had time for that weren't me. And Tommy. Tommy sent a text. Merry Christmas, Mom. Christmas tree, followed by a generic Christmas gif. That was it. 37 years of Christmas mornings, of staying up until midnight wrapping presents with Frank, of making his favorite cinnamon rolls from scratch every Christmas morning, of listening to him rattle off his gift wishes starting in October, reduced to an emoji and a gif he probably sent to 50 other people. I sat in my living room that night, surrounded by unopened gifts I'd bought for grandchildren who weren't there, and I realized something that hit me like ice water. I had become a ghost in my own family. Not dead, but not really alive to them either. Just there. Taking up space they wished they could use for something else. A obligation they resented, a tradition they'd outgrown, a relic from a version of family life they were trying to leave behind. The loneliness wasn't new, but the understanding was. I'd been making excuses for them, rationalizing their behavior, telling myself they were just busy, just overwhelmed with their own lives. But that night, staring at Frank's empty chair, and my grandchildren's untouched presents, I stopped lying to myself. They didn't want me there anymore. I was a reminder of obligations they didn't want, traditions they found inconvenient, a version of family life that felt outdated to them. The hardest part wasn't being alone. It was being invisible. When I spoke, they half listened while checking their phones. When I shared memories about their childhood, they glazed over with polite smiles like I was a stranger sharing stories about children they didn't know. When I offered advice, the kind that comes from 7 decades of living, of making mistakes and learning from them, they exchanged looks that said, "There goes Mom again." I had become wallpaper in conversations about my own grandchildren's lives. They'd talk around me, over me, about me, but never really to me. "Mom's doing fine," Lisa would tell people on the phone while I sat right there, as if I weren't capable of speaking for myself. "Grandma's been the same," Michael would report to his wife, reducing me to a weather report. Static and predictable. The same. As if not changing, not evolving, not growing was something to be proud of. As if at 73, I was supposed to freeze in place like a photograph, never having new thoughts or feelings or dreams. As if the day Frank died, I became a museum exhibit of their childhood rather than a living person with a future still ahead of me. But here's what they didn't understand. I wasn't the same. I was dying a little more each day. Not from illness, but from irrelevance. Every missed phone call, every shortened visit, every time they talked about me like I wasn't there, a piece of me disappeared. I was being erased in real time, and the people doing it were the ones who claimed to love me most. I started noticing things I'd trained myself not to see. How they'd glance at their watches during visits. How they'd stand by the door instead of sitting down, keeping the goodbye close. How they'd ask, "How are you?" but start talking about themselves before I could answer beyond fine. I noticed how they'd take calls during our conversations, how they'd text while I was talking, how they'd cut me off mid-sentence to tell their children to stop doing something. I noticed how they'd talk about their lives, work promotions, vacation plans, the kids' achievements, but never ask about mine. As if my life had ended the day I became a grandmother, as if I existed only in relation to them and had no independent thoughts, dreams, or experiences worth sharing. I noticed how they'd bring up Frank constantly. "Dad would have loved this. Dad always said that," but never asked how I was coping with his absence, what I missed most, or what I was learning about myself in this new chapter of my life. The turning point came on a Tuesday in March. I was at the grocery store, struggling with a heavy bag of cat food. Yes, I'd gotten a cat, because cats don't cancel visits, when a young man helped me load it into my cart. "Thank you, sweetheart," I said. "No problem," he smiled. "You remind me of my grandmother. She just moved into assisted living, and every time I visit, she lights up like Christmas morning. She says it's the best part of her week." She's got all these stories about the old days, and I love hearing them. She's lived through so much. I smiled back, but inside, something cracked open. This stranger's grandmother got weekly visits that were the highlight of her life. Her grandson asked to hear her stories and actually listened. Her experiences were valued, her wisdom appreciated. I couldn't remember the last time one of my children seemed genuinely happy to see me. I couldn't remember the last time they asked about my past, my memories, the lessons I'd learned. I couldn't remember the last time they treated me like someone who had lived a full, rich life worth exploring. That night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked at myself in the mirror, really looked. Not the quick glance while brushing my teeth, but a full assessment of who I'd become. I saw a woman who'd shrunk. Not just physically, though 5 years of loneliness had done that too. The life had gone out of my posture, the spark had dimmed in my eyes. I'd shrunk in every way that mattered. I spoke quieter, took up less space, asked for less, expected less, became less. I'd been so afraid of being too much for my children that I'd become not enough for myself. When had I stopped having opinions about anything other than their lives? When had I stopped pursuing interests beyond their interests? When had I become so small that I could disappear completely and barely leave a dent? The woman in the mirror was a stranger. She looked tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. She looked hungry in a way that food couldn't satisfy. She looked lost in her own life. I remembered who I used to be. Before Frank's death, before the kids moved away, before I became just mom and forgot I was also Eleanor. I used to paint watercolors. I used to garden with passion, not just obligation. I used to read voraciously, stay up late discussing books with Frank. I used to have opinions about politics, art, life beyond my children's achievements. I used to take up space unapologetically. The next morning, I made a decision. If they were going to treat me like I was already gone, maybe it was time to show them what my absence actually looked like. I started small. When Sarah called with her weekly obligatory check-in, the one that lasted exactly 5 minutes, and covered the weather, my health, and whether I needed anything from the store, I didn't answer. When she called again 20 minutes later, worried, I texted back, out with friends. I wasn't, but I could have been. And that possibility felt revolutionary. I stopped being available on demand. When Lisa called at 8 p.m. on a Wednesday, because she needed me to pick up her son from practice, emergency at work, Mom, can you help? I said no. What do you mean, no? She asked, like I'd spoken in a foreign language. I mean I have other plans. What plans? The question offended me. As if my time was so empty, so worthless, that I couldn't possibly have anything important to do. Does it matter? I asked. I said no. I stopped sending the birthday cards with handwritten notes and checks inside. For 40 years, I'd never missed a birthday. Never. I'd driven through snowstorms to deliver cakes, stayed up late making special dinners, spent money I didn't always have on gifts I thought they'd love. When Tommy's birthday came in April, I sent nothing. No card, no call, no acknowledgement. Let him see what it felt like to be forgotten. I stopped calling to check on the grandchildren. No more, how was school, texts to teenagers who responded with one-word answers. No more offers to attend soccer games I wasn't invited to. No more asking about friends, grades, activities that I was apparently not important enough to be included in. I stopped offering to babysit when they needed help. For years, I'd been their reliable backup plan. Date night. Call Mom. Business trip. Send the kids to Mom. Last-minute emergency. Mom will handle it. Not anymore. For the first time in decades, I stopped being available. And the silence was deafening. The reaction was swift and predictable. "Mom, you missed Emma's soccer game," Lisa called to say. "She was looking for you in the stands." "I wasn't invited," I replied. "You don't need an invitation, you're her grandmother." "Apparently I do need one, because nobody told me about it. Nobody told me when it was, where it was, or that Emma wanted me there." Silence. "Then, well, I thought you knew we played every Saturday. I thought you knew I wanted to be included in my granddaughter's life, but here we are." "You're being dramatic, Mom." Dramatic? As if wanting to know about my granddaughter's activities was some kind of performance. As if expecting basic communication was an unreasonable demand. "I'm being honest," I said. "There's a difference." More uncomfortable silence. Michael was next. "Mom, you haven't returned my calls. You called twice in 3 weeks, and both times you wanted something, my cornbread recipe, and to ask if I still had your father's tools." "I'm not a Google search, Michael. I'm your mother." "That's not. I mean, we talk all the time." "No, you talk at me when you need something. There's a difference. I don't understand why you're being like this." "Like what?" "Like someone who expected to be treated with basic respect. Like someone who wanted to be valued for more than the services I could provide. When's the last time you asked me how I'm doing and actually waited for an answer?" I asked. "I always ask how you're doing. And when I start to tell you, you change the subject, or look at your phone, or remember something you need to do. You ask because it's polite, not because you care about the answer." He couldn't respond to that because it was true. Tommy was the most honest. "Mom, what's going on? You're acting weird." "I'm acting like someone who's tired of being an afterthought." "You're not an afterthought. When's the last time you asked me about my dreams? My fears? My hopes for the future? When's the last time any of you invited me to something just because you wanted my company, not because you needed something?" He couldn't answer, because the answer was never. "When's the last time you called just to talk? Not to ask for a recipe or money or babysitting, but just to hear my voice, because you missed me?" Silence. "That's what I thought." Sarah tried a different approach. She showed up unannounced with takeout Chinese food and that patronizing voice people use with the elderly, slower, louder, like age had affected my hearing instead of just my patience. "Mom, we're worried about you. This isn't like you." "Maybe that's the problem," I said, not inviting her to sit down. "Maybe I've been being like me for so long that nobody noticed I was disappearing." "You're not disappearing, Mom. You're being dramatic." There was that word again. Dramatic. As if wanting to matter to my own children was some kind of performance. As if expecting basic human decency was unreasonable theater. "Sarah," I said, "when's the last time you asked me about my dreams?" "Your dreams?" She said it like I'd asked about my plans to colonize Mars. "Yes. My dreams. The things I think about, want to do, hope for. When's the last time you treated me like a person instead of just your mother?" She looked confused, genuinely confused, like I'd asked her to solve calculus. "I don't understand what you're asking." "I'm asking when you stopped seeing me as Eleanor and started seeing me as just Mom, a function instead of a person." The truth was, I had dreams. Big ones. I wanted to travel, maybe take that photography class at the community college I'd been thinking about for years. I wanted to learn to paint again, adopt another cat, maybe even date again, yes, date. Frank had been gone 5 years, and while I loved him deeply and always would, I wasn't dead. But my children couldn't see past their own narrow definition of who I was supposed to be. Grandmother. Mother. The woman who made holidays happen and remembered birthdays and provided free childcare. I was supposed to be grateful for scraps of attention, content with being the emergency contact they never had to call, happy to exist in the margins of their lives. I wasn't content. I was starving. The breaking point came at Emma's 8th birthday party, the one I wasn't invited to until the last minute, when their regular babysitter cancelled. Can you come watch the other kids while we take Emma and her friends to Chuck E. Cheese? Lisa asked, calling at 10 a.m. for a 2 p.m. party. So you want me to miss my granddaughter's party to babysit the other children? It's not missing it, Mom. You'd be helping. The other kids are too young for Chuck E. Cheese. And I'm too old for my granddaughter's birthday party. That's not what I meant. It's exactly what you meant. You want me to be the help, not the family. You're being difficult. I'm being honest about what you're asking me. You want me to miss the celebration to do the cleanup. I went anyway, but not to help. I went to say goodbye. I arrived at Lisa's house to find chaos. 7 children running around hopped up on pre-party sugar, Lisa barking orders at her husband about cameras and cake, everyone focused on the logistics of the celebration rather than the joy of it. Emma ran up to me, beautiful in her princess dress, and hugged my legs. Grandma. Are you coming to Chuck E. Cheese with us? Before I could answer, Lisa intervened. Grandma's going to stay here with the little ones, sweetie. Chuck E. Cheese is too loud for them. Too loud for them, but apparently fine for an 8-year-old's grandmother. I watched my granddaughter's face fall slightly, then brighten with the resilience children have. Okay. Will you save me some cake? Of course, baby. I spent the next 3 hours in a house full of toddlers, while my family made memories I wasn't part of. I changed diapers, cleaned up spills, and listened to children cry for parents who weren't there, all while my granddaughter celebrated her birthday somewhere else. When they returned, loud and laughing and full of stories about arcade games and prizes, I sat in the corner watching them relive the experience. They showed me photos on their phones, like I was a neighbor who'd asked to see vacation pictures. Look how happy Emma looks. She won so many tickets. The pizza was terrible, but the kids loved it. I watched my granddaughter blow out candles on a cake I'd bought, but hadn't seen her receive. I watched my children laugh and take photos and make memories I wasn't part of. And I realized, this was my life now. This was what they'd reduced me to. The help. The backup plan. The person who handled the inconvenient parts, so they could enjoy the fun parts. When the party ended and the last guest left, I stood up. I need to tell you all something, I said. They barely looked up from their phones, already posting pictures to social media, already moving on to the next thing. I'm done. That got their attention. Done with what? Michael asked, not looking up from his phone. Done being your safety net that you never acknowledge. Done being the grandmother you only remember when you need something. Done pretending that being treated like furniture is the same as being loved. Mom, that's not, Sarah started. It is, I cut her off. And I'm tired of pretending it isn't. I pulled out 4 envelopes from my purse. I'd prepared them that morning, knowing this moment would come, feeling it building like a storm I could finally see approaching. These are Christmas cards, I said. The last ones I'll ever send you. Lisa frowned. What do you mean, the last ones? I mean I'm retiring from this family. The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that had finally caught. You can't retire from family, Tommy said, finally looking up from his phone. Watch me. I handed each of them their envelope. Inside was a Christmas card, the kind I'd sent every year for decades, with handwritten notes about how proud I was, how much I loved them, how blessed I felt to be their mother. But these were different. These told the truth. Sarah, you stopped seeing me years ago. I hope someday you remember that mothers are people too, with dreams and feelings and needs that extend beyond your convenience. I raised a daughter who was kind and thoughtful. I don't know who you became. Michael, you turned love into obligation and respect into resentment. I won't apologize for wanting more than the scraps of attention you throw my way when you need something. Your father would be ashamed of the man you've become. Lisa, you gave me leftovers of your time and expected gratitude. I deserve better than being your emergency babysitter and backup plan. I taught you to value yourself. I don't know why you can't do the same for me. Tommy, you forgot I exist until you need something, then you remember to send a text with an emoji. I'm forgetting you back. Maybe when you grow up, you'll understand what you lost. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the clock ticking on the mantel, could hear Emma playing with her birthday toys in the next room, could hear the sound of a family finally seeing itself clearly. This is cruel, Sarah whispered. No, I said, my voice steady as stone. Cruel is letting your mother fade away, while pretending you're too busy to notice. Cruel is treating someone who raised you like an inconvenience. Cruel is taking love for granted until it stops coming. We love you, Mom, Michael said, but it sounded hollow even to him. You love the idea of me. The mom-shaped space in your lives that makes casseroles and remembers birthdays, and never complains, and never asks for anything in return. But you don't love me, Eleanor, the woman who has thoughts and feelings and needs that extend beyond your convenience. That's not true, Lisa said, but she couldn't meet my eyes. When's the last time any of you asked me what I'm reading? What I'm thinking about? What I'm worried about that isn't related to one of you? When's the last time you asked me about my childhood, my dreams, my fears, my hopes for whatever time I have left? Silence. You know everything about my children and nothing about me. You can tell me every detail of your work lives, but you don't know what I do with my days. You expect me to be fascinated by your problems, but you've never asked about mine. I picked up my purse, the same one I'd carried to their school plays and graduation ceremonies and weddings. Where are you going? Tommy asked. To live the life I have left instead of waiting for the one you might give me. Mom, please, Sarah said, standing up. We can fix this. We can do better. You've had 5 years to do better. You had all the chances you needed. What do you want from us? Michael asked, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. As if love was some kind of negotiation, some contract with terms to be met. I wanted you to want me, I said simply. Not just what I could do for you, but me. I wanted you to be curious about the woman who raised you. I wanted you to care about my happiness the way I've always cared about yours. We do care, Lisa said. No, you care that I'm not a burden. There's a difference. And I walked out. That was 8 months ago. 8 months of silence. 8 months of learning who I am when I'm not defined by being their mother, their grandmother, their emergency contact. The first few weeks were hard. Harder than I'd expected. Not because I missed them, though I did, but because I had to rebuild myself from scratch. For so long, my identity had been wrapped up in theirs. I was Sarah's mother, Michael's mother, Lisa's mother, Tommy's mother. Emma's grandmother. The woman who remembered everyone's birthday, and made sure holidays happened. Without those roles, who was I? I had to learn all over again. I took the photography class at the community college. Turned out, I had an eye for it. Something I never would have discovered if I'd stayed frozen in place, being the same old mom they expected me to be. I joined a book club full of women who actually listened when I spoke, who asked my opinion and valued my responses. I started